For many people, financial change feels slow. It feels like something that requires years of discipline, huge income increases, or dramatic life changes. But in reality, financial direction can change much faster than financial outcomes, and direction is what matters most. Because when the direction changes, the math starts working in your favor. 3 months isn't long enough to become wealthy, but 3 months is often long enough to rebuild control over your money. In 90 days, people routinely stop constant paycheck stress, eliminate unnecessary financial leaks, build their first meaningful savings buffer, and install systems that keep working automatically. The goal isn't to transform your life overnight. The goal is to reset the trajectory. And today, we're going to walk through exactly how that reset happens. Why 3 months is enough to shift financial momentum. Financial progress tends to happen in phases. The first phase isn't wealth building, it's stabilization. Before investments grow or net worth expands, something simpler has to happen. Your cash flow must become predictable. In other words, your income consistently exceeds your spending. This might sound obvious, but a large number of households operate without that stability. A survey conducted by the Federal Reserve found that about 37% of U.S. adults would struggle to cover a $400 emergency with cash savings. That statistic doesn't necessarily mean people are irresponsible. Often, it simply reflects systems that were never intentionally designed. Money comes in, bills go out. Subscriptions accumulate, and over time, the structure becomes messy. 3 months is enough time to clean the structure, and once the structure improves, everything else becomes easier. Month 1. Financial awareness. The first month is not about dramatic change, it's about clarity. Most people have a general idea of where their money goes, but general ideas are rarely precise, and precision matters. A study from the National Bureau of Economic Research found that households who track spending closely tend to reduce expenses by 5 to 15%, often without feeling a major lifestyle change. Why does this happen? Because awareness changes behavior automatically. When purchases become visible, some of them stop happening. For example, you might discover that 3 different streaming services are billing your account every month. Individually, they seem harmless, but together they might represent $45 or $60 each month. Over 3 months, that's already $135 to $180. And that's just one category. Month 1 is simply about seeing the full picture. The whiteboard moment, your financial map. Imagine a simple whiteboard. On the left side, income. On the right side, spending categories. Housing, transportation, food, insurance, subscriptions, discretionary spending. Most people have never actually laid out their financial life visually like this, but when you do, patterns become obvious. Sometimes the biggest category isn't what people expected. Sometimes small recurring costs appear far more frequently than assumed. The whiteboard exercise isn't about judgment, it's about visibility, because you can't adjust a system you can't see. Month 2. Fix the leaks. Once awareness exists, the second month focuses on removing inefficiencies, and many of those inefficiencies are surprisingly small. For example, imagine someone paying $95 for a premium phone plan, $18 for a cloud storage subscription, $14 for music streaming, and $22 for an unused fitness app. None of these individually feel dramatic, but together they represent almost $150 per month. Over 1 year, that's $1,800, and in many cases, people don't consciously choose these expenses every month. They simply continue. Month 2 is where small decisions begin to reclaim that money. Hidden cost behavior. There's another pattern that appears during financial audits. It's what economists sometimes describe as frictionless spending. When payments become automatic, the psychological cost decreases. You don't experience the purchase moment repeatedly. A behavioral analysis from Duke University found that people tend to spend 12 to 18% more when payments are automated or digitally abstracted, compared with physical transactions. That doesn't mean automation is bad. In fact, automation can be extremely useful, but it also means financial drift happens quietly. Month 2 is when that drift gets corrected. A small housing adjustment example. Sometimes the largest improvement comes from a single category, housing. Consider two scenarios. One household spends 38% of income on housing, another spends 25%. That difference may sound moderate, but for someone earning $5,000 monthly, that gap equals $630 every month. Over 3 months, that's nearly $2,000 of breathing room. This doesn't always require moving homes. Sometimes it means refinancing, negotiating insurance, or adjusting utility habits. But housing is often where financial pressure quietly builds.
Warning: the motivation trap. Many people approach financial change with bursts of motivation. They decide to cut everything at once: extreme budgets, severe restrictions, total lifestyle overhaul. And it usually lasts about 2 weeks. Then exhaustion appears, and the system collapses. Financial stability rarely comes from intensity. It comes from sustainability. A system that feels tolerable today is far more valuable than a perfect system that disappears next month. Month 3. Build the safety layer. Once spending becomes cleaner, the third month focuses on protection. That protection usually takes the form of a starter emergency fund. Not a massive reserve, just the first layer. Research from the Urban Institute found that households with even $250 to $750 in emergency savings are significantly less likely to miss bill payments after income disruptions. This is important because financial stress rarely comes from planned expenses. It comes from surprises, car repairs, medical bills, sudden travel. When a small buffer exists, those disruptions stop cascading into larger problems. The first $1,000 buffer. Many financial planners recommend aiming for the first $1,000 safety buffer, not because that number solves every emergency, but because it changes how people behave. When your account balance is always close to zero, every unexpected expense creates anxiety. But when $1,000 exists in reserve, the environment feels different. You stop reacting to money. You start managing it. Credit card behavior reset. The third month is also where many people adjust how they interact with credit. Credit cards are not inherently harmful, but their structure can disguise cost. If someone carries $4,000 in credit card balance at 20% interest, the interest alone can exceed $800 per year. That's money disappearing without creating any new value. By stabilizing cash flow first, many people begin paying balances down consistently, and over time, interest pressure declines. The career income layer. 3 months is also enough time to begin improving the income side of the equation. Not necessarily through dramatic career changes, sometimes through smaller adjustments. For example, requesting a compensation review, negotiating freelance work, adding a temporary side project. Even an extra $200 or $300 monthly changes the system, because that additional income can accelerate savings, debt reduction, or investing. Small increases matter. Group behavior insight. Interestingly, researchers studying financial habits often notice a pattern. People who improve their finances rarely change just one thing. They change 3 or 4 behaviors simultaneously. A Journal of Consumer Research study examining household financial decisions found that coordinated changes across multiple spending categories often produced far larger improvements than a single large cut. In other words, progress usually comes from many moderate adjustments working together. Timeline progression example. Let's imagine a simple 90-day progression. Month 1. You identify $120 in unnecessary subscriptions and recurring services. Month 2, you redirect that $120 towards savings and reduce discretionary spending by another $80. Now, $200 per month is freed. Month 3, your emergency fund reaches $600. At this point, the system has changed, not dramatically, but structurally, and structural changes compound. The psychology of early wins. Early financial progress matters psychologically. When people experience visible improvement, they tend to continue the behavior. Behavioral economists sometimes call this progress reinforcement. Once someone sees a savings account growing, decisions often begin aligning with that goal. Spending becomes slightly more intentional. Planning becomes easier. Momentum builds. Another helpful way to visualize the process is with a simple formula. On a whiteboard, write 3 lines: income, spending, margin. Margin is simply the difference between the two. The goal of the first 3 months is not perfection, it's expanding the margin, even if that margin starts small. Why systems beat discipline. One of the most common financial misconceptions is the belief that success depends primarily on discipline. But discipline is unreliable. People get tired, busy, distracted. What actually works better are systems: automatic savings transfers, pre-scheduled investment contributions, clear spending limits. When the system is built correctly, behavior requires less effort, and financial stability becomes easier to maintain. The investing transition. Once cash flow stabilizes and the first savings buffer exists, investing becomes the next natural step. Even modest contributions matter. For example, investing $200 per month in a diversified portfolio, earning around 7% annually, could grow to roughly $50,000 in about 15 years, not because of large deposits, but because time and compounding do the work. The real outcome of 90 days. After 3 months, the visible changes might seem small. Maybe your savings account has a few $100s. Maybe your spending is slightly cleaner. Maybe debt is declining slowly. But beneath the surface, something more important has happened. Your financial structure has improved, and structure determines long-term results. Final reflection. 3 months will not transform your entire financial life, but it can change something more fundamental. It can change the direction. In 90 days, you can understand exactly where your money goes, remove inefficient spending, build the first emergency buffer, reduce financial stress, and create systems that begin working automatically. From that point forward, progress stops relying on bursts of motivation. Instead, it begins relying on structure. And when financial systems improve, results tend to follow naturally over time. So if your finances feel complicated right now, the goal doesn't have to be massive change overnight. Sometimes the most powerful shift is simply this: 90 days of deliberate adjustment. Because small structural improvements today can quietly shape the next 10 years of your financial life. If you found this helpful, consider subscribing to the channel. Each week, we break down the behaviors, systems, and financial decisions that quietly shape long-term wealth. And if you want to continue improving your financial habits, you might enjoy the next video on your screen.